Good evening. This is Evelyn Brooks, and you're listening to Echoes of 1970. Tonight, I'm holding a letter that should have never been sent. It's from a woman named Margaret Holloway, a radio operator at a lighthouse on the Oregon coast. What she heard that night in December 1973. Well, some sounds were never meant to be remembered. Margaret was 42 years old when she took that job. Divorced, childless, the kind of woman people forgot about at parties. But she had a gift. She could hear things in static that others couldn't. Voices, patterns, secrets hiding between frequencies. This is her story, and I can still hear the rain against her window. Margaret Holloway arrived at Beacon Point Lighthouse on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The sky was the color of old bruises, and the Pacific crashed against the rocks like it was trying to break through to another world. She carried one suitcase, a portable radio, and a leather journal with her initials burned into the cover. The lighthouse keeper, a man named Dutch Carmichael, was waiting at the door. He was 70 if he was a day, with hands like tree roots and eyes that had seen too many storms. "You're the new operator," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. You know how to work the equipment?" "I've been doing this for 20 years. Dutch nodded slowly, studying her face like he was trying to read something written in a language he'd forgotten. Good, because the last operator left without saying goodbye, just packed up one morning and walked down to the road. Never came back for her things. Margaret didn't ask why. She'd learned a long time ago that some questions opened doors you couldn't close. The radio room was on the 3rd floor of the lighthouse, a circular space with windows facing every direction. The equipment was older than Margaret expected. Vacuum tubes and analog dials, the kind of gear that hummed with a life of its own. There was a cot in the corner, a hot plate, and a small bathroom that smelled like rust and the sea. "You'll monitor the emergency frequency," Dutch explained. "Fishing boats, cargo ships, Coast Guard, standard protocol, log everything, report anything unusual." "What counts as unusual?" Dutch's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "You'll know it when you hear it." That first night, Margaret sat at the radio desk and let the frequencies wash over her. She'd always loved this part of the job, the way voices emerged from the static like ghosts stepping out of fog. A trawler captain reporting his position, a woman on a yacht asking about weather patterns, a Coast Guard operator running through a checklist with the bored precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She logged everything in the journal, her handwriting small and precise. At 11:47 p.m., she heard something different. It started as a low hum, almost below the range of hearing. Then it grew, oscillating between frequencies like something was scanning, searching. Margaret's hand moved to the tuning dial almost instinctively, trying to lock onto the signal. For just a moment, she caught it. A voice, male, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. The words came in rapid bursts, urgent and rhythmic, like a prayer or a warning. And underneath it all, there was something else, a sound that made her think of deep water and things that moved in darkness. Then it was gone. Margaret sat very still, her hand still on the dial. Her heart was beating too fast. She looked down at the frequency display, 4625 kHz, a frequency that shouldn't have had any traffic at all. She wrote it down in the journal. 2347, unknown signal, 4625 kHz, foreign language, duration approx. 30 seconds. When she climbed down to the kitchen the next morning, Dutch was already there, frying eggs on an ancient stove. "You hear anything unusual last night?" he asked without turning around. Margaret poured herself coffee from a pot that looked like it had been there since the lighthouse was built. "Depends on your definition of unusual." That's not an answer. A voice, 4625 kHz, couldn't identify the language. Dutch was quiet for a long time. When he finally turned around, his face was carefully neutral. "That frequency is dead air. Has been for years. Not last night." "You sure about that?" Margaret met his eyes. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I know the difference between a signal and interference." Dutch nodded slowly, like he'd just confirmed something he'd been afraid of. The last operator heard it too, every night for 2 weeks. Then she stopped sleeping, started talking to herself, said the voice was calling her name. What was her name? Sarah Chen. She was good at her job, real good. But something about that signal, it got inside her head. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Where is she now? State Hospital in Salem. Last I heard, she still won't talk about what she heard. That night, Margaret told herself she wouldn't listen for the signal. She'd monitor the standard frequencies, log the routine traffic, and ignore everything else. But at 11:43 p.m., she found her hand moving to the dial almost against her will. She tuned to 4625 kHz and waited. At exactly 11:47, the signal came back. This time, it was stronger. The voice was clearer, and Margaret realized with a start that she could almost understand it. Not the words themselves, but the emotion behind them. Desperation, longing, fear. And then, just for a second, the voice said something in English. Margaret, her name. Her hand jerked away from the radio like it had burned her. The signal continued, that strange rhythmic speech, but she couldn't hear anything else through the rushing sound in her ears. It knew her name. She didn't write it in the journal. She didn't tell Dutch. She went to bed and lay awake until dawn, listening to the lighthouse beam sweep across the walls like a slow heartbeat. The next day, she drove into the nearest town, a place called Mercy Harbor, population 847. There was a library in the basement of the town hall, and the librarian was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and the kind of face that had seen every secret the town had to offer. I'm looking for information about Beacon Point Lighthouse, Margaret said. The librarian's expression changed, just slightly. You're the new operator. Word travels fast. In a town this size, everything travels fast. What do you want to know? It's history. Anything unusual. The librarian disappeared into the stacks and came back with a folder of old newspaper clippings and photographs. Margaret spread them across a table and started reading. Beacon Point Lighthouse was built in 1897. It had guided ships through treacherous waters for 76 years. There had been 12 keepers in that time. 3 of them had died in accidents. 2 had disappeared without a trace. 1 had gone insane and tried to burn the lighthouse down. But that wasn't what caught Margaret's attention. In 1952, a Russian fishing vessel called the Svetlana had gone missing off the coast. 23 crew members never found. The Coast Guard had searched for 2 weeks before giving up. According to the reports, the last radio transmission from the Svetlana had been on 4625 kHz. A distress call in Russian, abruptly cut off. Margaret's hands were shaking as she copied down the details. You heard something, didn't you? The librarian said quietly. Margaret looked up. How did you know? Because every operator hears it eventually. The question is whether they listen. What do you mean? The librarian sat down across from her, folding her hands on the table. My mother worked at that lighthouse in 1953, right after the Svetlana disappeared. She heard the same signal you're hearing now. A voice, speaking Russian, always at the same time. She became obsessed with it, started learning Russian, trying to translate what it was saying. She filled notebooks with her attempts. What was it saying? She never told me. But 2 weeks before she quit, she said something I've never forgotten. She said the voice wasn't calling for help. It was giving directions. Directions to what? She wouldn't say. But the next morning, she walked down to the rocks below the lighthouse and stood there for 3 hours, staring at the water. Dutch found her and brought her home. She never went back. Margaret felt ice forming in her stomach. Is she still alive? She died in 1969. But before she passed, she told me to warn anyone who worked at that lighthouse. Don't follow the voice. No matter what it promises, don't follow it into the water. That night, Margaret sat in the radio room with the journal open in front of her. She'd made a decision. She would listen to the signal one more time. She would record it, transcribe it, and figure out what it was saying. And then she would report it to the Coast Guard and let them handle it. At 11:47, the signal came through like clockwork. Margaret pressed the record button on a portable tape recorder and leaned close to the speaker. The voice was louder tonight, more insistent. The Russian words tumbled over each other in a desperate stream, and underneath it all was that sound, that deep, wet sound that made her think of things rising from the ocean floor. And then the voice switched to English again. "Margaret, can you hear me? Margaret, I know you're listening." Her breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she whispered, knowing it was impossible, knowing the signal was just a recording or interference or something explainable. The voice paused. For a moment, there was only static. Then, "I'm what's left. We're all what's left. We've been calling for so long. 21 years, Margaret. 21 years in the dark and the cold and the pressure. But you can hear us. You're the first one who can really hear us. The Svetlana." Margaret breathed. "Yes, we're still here. We never left. The water took us, but it didn't let us go. It kept us, changed us, and now we're calling anyone who will listen, because we can't come back on our own. We need someone to show us the way." Margaret's hand hovered over the power switch, but she couldn't make herself turn it off. "Show you the way to what? Home. Or whatever's left of it. The lighthouse, Margaret. The light guides ships to shore. It can guide us too. All you have to do is turn it toward the water. Point it down. Show us the way up." "That's insane." "Is it? You've felt it, haven't you? The pull, the curiosity, the need to understand. It's been growing since you first heard my voice. Every night it gets stronger. Soon you won't be able to resist it." Margaret switched off the radio with shaking hands. The silence that followed was almost worse than the voice. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the radio room, staring at the dark water beyond the windows, and tried to convince herself that she'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, isolation, the power of suggestion. But she knew the truth. She'd heard it, and worse, part of her wanted to hear it again. The next morning, Dutch found her in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes red and unfocused. "You look like hell," he said. "I talked to it. Last night. It answered me." Dutch's expression went very still. "What did it say?" "It wants me to redirect the lighthouse beam. Point it down at the water. It says it needs the light to find its way back." Dutch sat down heavily in a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "Sarah said the same thing. The night before she left, she tried to do it. I found her in the lamp room, trying to adjust the mirrors. She was crying and laughing at the same time, saying they were almost home. Just a little more light, and they'd be home." "What are they, Dutch? What's really out there?" "I don't know. But I've been keeping this lighthouse for 40 years, and I've learned one thing. Some doors are meant to stay closed. The Svetlana went down in 1952. Whatever's using that frequency now, it's not the men who were on that ship. Or if it is, they're not men anymore." Margaret wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words, because deep down, she knew he was right. "I'm leaving," she said. "Today. I'll pack my things and it won't matter." "What?" "Once you've heard it, really heard it, it stays with you." Sarah made it all the way to Salem before she started hearing it again. No radio, no equipment, but she heard it anyway, in her head, growing louder every day. Margaret felt her world tilting. "Then what do I do?" Dutch reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm. "You fight it. Every night you fight it. You don't listen. You don't engage. You treat it like it doesn't exist. And maybe if you're strong enough, it'll move on to someone else." But that night, at 11:47, Margaret was sitting at the radio again. She told herself she was just checking, just making sure, just one more time to understand what she was dealing with. The voice came through clear as crystal. "Margaret, I knew you'd come back. They always come back. What do you want from me?" "The same thing anyone wants. To go home. To stop being lost. We've been down here so long, Margaret. The pressure, the darkness, the things that move in the deep places. We just want to see the sky again. You're not real. You're interference, or a recording, or—" "Touch the glass, Margaret." "What?" "The window. Touch it. Feel how cold it is. That's us. We're right outside." We've always been right outside, just beyond the light's reach. Waiting. Margaret's hand moved toward the window before she could stop it. Her fingertips touched the glass. It was ice cold and wet. She jerked her hand back. The glass was bone dry. "You felt it, didn't you?" The voice whispered. "The truth. We're not far away, Margaret. We're right here. We've always been right here. And if you shine the light down, just for a moment, you'll see us. You'll see what we've become." Margaret's other hand was reaching for the lamp room door. She watched it move like it belonged to someone else. "No," she said. "No, I won't. You will. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually. Because you need to know, Margaret. It's who you are. You've spent your whole life listening for voices in the static, searching for meaning in the silence. And now you've found it. Now you've found us. And you can't walk away from that." Margaret yanked the radio's power cord from the wall. The voice continued speaking. Not from the radio. From inside her head. "See, Margaret? It doesn't matter anymore. We're with you now. We'll always be with you. And sooner or later, you'll want to see. You'll need to see. And when you do, we'll be waiting." She ran. Down the stairs, out the door, into the rain that had started falling like the sky was weeping. She ran until her lungs burned, and her legs gave out, and she collapsed on the wet grass halfway between the lighthouse and the road. Dutch found her there an hour later. He carried her inside, wrapped her in blankets, and made her drink tea laced with whiskey. "I can still hear it," she whispered. "Even now. It's still talking." Dutch nodded. He looked unsurprised and unutterably sad. "I know. Make it stop. Please, make it stop. I can't. Nobody can. But I can help you live with it." He took her up to the lamp room, the very top of the lighthouse, where the massive Fresnel lens rotated on its track, sending its beam across the water in a slow, steady sweep. "Look," he said, pointing down at the water. Margaret looked, for just a moment. As the beam passed over the waves, she thought she saw something. Pale shapes just below the surface. Faces, perhaps, or things that had once been faces. They turned toward the light like flowers following the sun. Then the beam moved on, and there was only darkness. "They're always there," Dutch said quietly. "They've been there since 1952, maybe longer. This lighthouse keeps them away. The light pushes them back, but if you ever turn it downward, if you ever give them a path to follow, they'll come up. Yes? What happens then? I don't know. And I've spent 40 years making sure I never find out." Margaret stood in the lamp room for a long time, watching the beam rotate, listening to the voice in her head grow fainter and fainter as the light pushed against the darkness. "I can't do this," she finally said. "I'm not strong enough. No one is. Not alone. But you don't have to be alone. You'll help me? For as long as I can. After that," Dutch shrugged, "after that, you'll have to help the next person. That's how it works. We carry each other through the darkness." Margaret stayed at Beacon Point Lighthouse for 3 more years. Every night at 11:47, she heard the voice. Sometimes it pleaded. Sometimes it raged. Sometimes it whispered promises of knowledge and understanding and belonging. She never turned the light downward. In 1976, Dutch Carmichael died in his sleep. They found him in his bed, peaceful, his face turned toward the window. Margaret arranged the funeral and stayed on as both operator and keeper. In 1979, a young woman named Linda Park arrived to take over the radio duties. Margaret taught her everything: how to maintain the equipment, how to log the signals, how to fight the voice when it came. "It will know your name," Margaret warned. "It will promise you answers. Don't listen. Just keep the light turning. That's all that matters." Linda lasted 2 years before she broke. Margaret found her in the lamp room one November night, trying to redirect the beam. They struggled. The lens shifted. For just 5 seconds, the light pointed straight down at the water. 5 seconds. That was all it took. Margaret saw them rising. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Pale shapes ascending through the black water, like a terrible reverse rain. They weren't quite human anymore. The pressure and time had changed them into something else, something that belonged to the deep places. She and Linda fought to turn the light back to its proper position. The beams swept across the rising shapes, and they scattered like smoke, retreating back into the depths. Linda left the next morning. She never spoke about what she'd seen. Margaret stayed. Years passed. New operators came and went. Some lasted months. Some lasted days. One lasted only a single night before walking down to the beach and trying to swim out to meet the voices. The Coast Guard found him 3 miles offshore, treading water, his eyes empty, still trying to swim deeper. In 1994, Margaret Holloway finally left Beacon Point Lighthouse. She was 63 years old. Her hands shook constantly. She hadn't slept properly in 2 decades, but she'd kept the light turning. She'd kept them down there, where they belonged. She moved to a small apartment in Portland. She still heard the voice sometimes, late at night, whispering from the spaces between radio stations. But it was faint now, distant, angry. She wrote everything down in her journal, the dates, the frequencies, the things she'd seen. And in December 1995, she sent it to a radio show called Echoes of 1970. She sent it to me. I've kept her letter all these years. Sometimes, late at night, I take out my old radio and tune to 4625 kilohertz. I've never heard the voice myself, but I've felt something there. A presence, a waiting. Beacon Point Lighthouse is automated now. No keepers, no operators, just machines and computers doing the work that people once did. But the light still turns. And if you ever find yourself on that stretch of coast, on a dark night when the fog rolls in from the Pacific, look out at the water when the beam sweeps past. You might see them, the shapes, still down there, still waiting, still calling, and if you're very unlucky, one of them might call your name. Margaret died in 2003, peacefully, in her sleep. But the last thing she wrote in her journal, the very last entry, was this: I can still hear them. After all these years, they're still calling. And sometimes, late at night, I want to answer. I want to tell them I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't help them. I'm sorry they're still lost. But I know what would happen if I did. I know what they've become. And I know that some things are better left in the darkness. Some voices are better left unheard. Some lights should never shine down. This has been Evelyn Brooks, and you've been listening to Echoes of 1970. The journal is closed now. The tape has run out. But if you're listening late at night, and you hear something between the frequencies, something that sounds almost like your name, don't answer. Just turn off the radio and walk away. Some calls were never meant to be returned. Good night. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.